Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her Tucson home. Still not clear what happened to the 84-year-old.
And the Pima County Sheriff is being criticized now by the head of the FBI over his handling of this case.
On the surface, it was an ordinary winter evening in Tucson. The kind of family night that carries no hint of what it will later become in hindsight. Nancy Guthrie, 84, spent January 31st, 2026, with family at Annie Guthrie's home before being driven back to her own residence around 9:45 p.m., just a short distance away. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, who drove her home, was also the final person documented seeing her before she stepped inside her home. After that point, the house falls into complete silence. Nancy Guthrie, an ailing, aged woman who could not walk more than a couple of yards without assistance, disappeared that night. Rumors followed soon enough, and many have suggested that Tommaso Cioni and Annie Guthrie may have tried to hide evidence about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. So, what actually happened that night? Where did Nancy Guthrie go? Today, we'll delve into the complete story. Be prepared for the shock. The first break in reality. At Nancy Guthrie's residence, the only thing that could be said with certainty was that she made it home. Around 9:45 p.m., the garage door cycled open and shut. After that, the house became a sealed space in the timeline. The first disruption came hours later. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker stopped communicating with her iPhone. In clinical and technical terms, such a disconnect is rarely random. Either the phone and the individual had been physically separated beyond range, or the device's function had been interrupted. Authorities confirmed the timing of the disconnect, but did not specify which scenario applied. What was clear was that this timestamp represented the precise instant when the night stopped behaving normally. Then, just as investigators began anchoring their timeline to that disruption, another anomaly surfaced. At around 6 a.m., a device linked to Nancy generated a location signal placing it approximately 200 miles from her Tucson home. That distance was not abstract. From Tucson, 200 miles south takes you to Sonora, Mexico. Head north and you approach Phoenix, a major urban hub. Move west and you approach Yuma and the California state line. Go east and you push toward New Mexico. Each direction represents a vastly different route, each with its own logistical implications, and each raises the same central question. What moved that far, that fast, and under what circumstances? Law enforcement remained notably restrained regarding this signal. Neither the FBI nor the Pima County Sheriff's Office publicly confirmed the exact nature or reliability of the data, leaving that 200-mile jump as one of the most debated elements of the case. This silence stood in contrast to other aspects of the investigation that had been openly acknowledged. Authorities confirmed blood evidence on the front porch, identified as Nancy's, along with doorbell footage capturing a masked individual approaching the home in the early hours. Search efforts extended to the property itself, including the septic system, and investigators removed a vehicle from the garage for examination. In a separate development, a man named Carlos Palazzo, living south of Tucson near the Mexican border, was detained and later released without charges. But the mystery only deepened. As the case deepened, the unanswered questions began to outnumber the confirmed facts. Who had access to Nancy's garage entry code, allowing seamless entry without forced delay? What significance, if any, was attached to the business card reportedly found on her front door? How had gloves discovered along a nearby roadway ended up roughly 2 miles from her home? And were they connected to the masked figure seen on camera? What did investigators uncover during repeated sweeps of both Nancy's residence and her daughter's home? And above all, what mechanism explained the sudden relocation of a device tied to her? across a distance that would have required deliberate, rapid movement? As these questions circulated, Savannah Guthrie quickly became the most visible advocate in the search for her mother. She stepped away from professional commitments, including Olympic coverage, to focus entirely on the effort to locate Nancy. Through a series of public appeals, she urged anyone with information to come forward and addressed whoever might have been responsible with a direct message. It was never too late to do the right thing. Authorities matched that urgency with tangible measures. The FBI announced a $50,000 reward for information, which has since been doubled, while large-scale awareness efforts spread Nancy's image across major cities in the American Southwest, including Houston, El Paso, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Antonio, Dallas, and Albuquerque. These locations sat along key transportation corridors, effectively casting a wide net across potential travel routes. At the same time, investigators narrowed their analytical focus to a critical window in the early hours of February 1st. Within that window, two data points dominated the timeline: the 2:30 a.m. pacemaker disconnect and the 6 a.m. distant phone signal. The gap between them, roughly 3.5 hours, became the most scrutinized period in the entire case. Covering 200 miles in that time frame was entirely feasible by vehicle, suggesting either rapid transport or deliberate separation of the phone from its owner. Meanwhile, conditions at the residence, signs of forced entry, confirmed blood evidence, and the presence of an unidentified masked individual pointed investigators toward a scenario involving planning rather than chance. Despite the scale of the response, the case remained structurally incomplete. Thousands of tips had been processed, search teams had covered vast areas, and forensic analysis continued across multiple domains. Yet, the central sequence eluded the authorities: the phone signal and the man at the front door. The 200-mile phone signal is the moment the case expands beyond a house in Tucson and turns into a logistical puzzle. The most direct reading is that either Nancy, or at least her phone, was transported rapidly across a significant distance in a short window of time. Covering roughly 200 miles in about 3.5 hours isn't extraordinary for a vehicle, but it does require intent, coordination, and awareness of timing. Early morning hours offer lighter traffic, fewer witnesses, and smoother routes, all factors consistent with a planned movement rather than something improvised. But there's a second interpretation as well. The phone may not represent Nancy's movement at all. It may represent a device taken and relocated to create a false trail. That kind of move suggests foresight, an understanding that investigators rely heavily on digital footprints, and that those footprints can be manipulated. Then there's a third possibility. Law enforcement agencies like the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office often control the release of information very tightly during active investigations. Silence sometimes reflects strategy. Details may be withheld to protect leads, verify evidence, or avoid alerting potential suspects. Former law enforcement voices have suggested that the public typically sees only a fraction of the full investigative picture. If that's true here, the phone signal could already be contextualized internally, even if it remains unexplained externally. Then there's the footage from the Google Nest doorbell camera. At approximately 1:47 a.m., a figure approached the front door. The individual wore a ski mask, dark clothing, gloves, and carried a backpack that appeared full. A firearm, secured in a holster, was visible at the hip. Yet, the behavior didn't fully align with a highly trained operator. Instead of disabling the camera cleanly, the individual attempted to obscure it by moving a nearby plant, a crude solution that failed. Analysts reviewing the footage noted small but telling details. The mask was thin enough to partially reveal facial structure under night vision. and the holster appeared to be a generic design rather than specialized gear. This raised an immediate question for investigators. Was this the primary actor or someone playing a supporting role? Moreover, the footage does not answer how the individual accessed the property or whether they knew the layout, the timing, or even the garage entry system. Then, the case took another turn, this time into the public domain. Ransom communications began appearing, not privately to the family, but through media outlets. Messages sent to organizations like TMZ and a Tucson television station outlined a demand: $6 million in Bitcoin, with a specific deadline. The method itself was unusual. Traditional ransom cases often relied on controlled communication channels. Broadcasting demands through media suggested a different objective: visibility, pressure, and perhaps the creation of fear on a wider scale. What followed only deepened the ambiguity. After the ransom details became public, a transaction of just $300 appeared in the designated cryptocurrency wallet. It was a negligible amount compared to the demand, but its timing was significant. Analysts speculated it could have been a test, someone checking whether the wallet was active or monitored. But there was no confirmed link between that deposit and the sender of the ransom messages. It could have represented involvement, interference, or simply noise introduced by an unrelated party. As these developments unfolded, the law enforcement response escalated dramatically. Specialized units were deployed across Tucson. SWAT teams moved through targeted areas in armored vehicles. A bomb squad was brought in. Most notably, the FBI's hostage rescue team arrived. Yet, the case refused to simplify. Nancy Guthrie was still missing. The Mexico connection. As the investigation widened, one possibility began to surface more frequently behind the scenes: that Nancy Guthrie may have been moved beyond U.S. borders. It was not a confirmed development, but it was a direction serious enough that the FBI extended coordination to Mexican authorities, requesting the case be circulated among law enforcement agencies across the border. That decision alone marked a shift in scale. Cases did not move into international coordination without reason. Yet despite this expansion, there was still no verified evidence that Nancy ever crossed into Mexico. Border Patrol surveillance systems were reviewed. Electronic tracking data was analyzed. Known crossing points, both official and informal, were examined for any trace of movement connected to her. Nothing definitive emerged, but absence of proof does not equal elimination. Instead, it forces a more complex reconstruction. If a cross-border transfer did occur, investigators believe it likely wasn't immediate. Could Nancy have been held somewhere first, moved later, or transferred in stages? Running alongside this line of inquiry was another, far less controlled stream of information: messages sent directly to media outlets. Organizations like TMZ reported receiving multiple emails from an individual claiming knowledge of Nancy's whereabouts, each message tied to demands for cryptocurrency. The tone of these communications escalated quickly. One warned the outlet to be prepared to go international, while another claimed a direct sighting south of the border, stating, "I know what I saw 5 days ago. That was definitely Nancy with them." These statements, if true, would have been explosive. But if false, they introduced noise into an already complex investigation. The structure of these messages raised its own questions. Unlike traditional ransom demands, which were typically directed privately toward family or negotiators, these were sent through public-facing channels. That suggested a different objective. At one point, the messages included not only a demand for Bitcoin, but also explicit threats, escalating the psychological pressure surrounding the case. law enforcement confirmed that these communications were being reviewed seriously. But notably, no one validated their authenticity. They could be a real lead, an opportunistic hoax, or an attempt by an outside party to insert itself into a high-profile case. But some people on the internet had a different idea about what actually happened. Did Tommaso Cioni and Annie Guthrie try to hide evidence? Tommaso Cioni, Annie Guthrie's husband, was identified in early reporting as the last confirmed person to see Nancy before she returned to her home around 9:45 p.m. in Tucson, Arizona. That single temporal fact became the anchor for speculation. In investigative terms, last known contact is a routine reference point. In public interpretation, it often becomes something much heavier: perceived implication. From that moment, social media platforms began reconstructing the night in reverse, filling in unknown gaps with assumptions. As discussion intensified, fragmented investigative details began circulating outside their official context. References to doorbell footage showing a masked individual, mentions of forensic collection of biological traces, and unverified summaries of DNA testing results were repeatedly shared, often without clarification of what had been confirmed versus what was still under analysis. In parallel, references to alleged ransom communications began circulating, though law enforcement did not publicly validate those claims in full detail. Each fragment acted like a standalone clue, but without procedural framing, they lost their investigative hierarchy. This environment created a pressure loop. The less confirmed information available, the more aggressively incomplete information was interpreted. Online discussions frequently treated coincidence as a pattern and proximity as implication. In unresolved cases, the closest known individuals often become the most discussed, regardless of official standing. Meanwhile, traditional media outlets were operating under a different constraint: verification thresholds. Reporters relied on law enforcement statements, court-approved disclosures, and confirmed forensic updates. But because official releases were intentionally limited during the early phase of the investigation, news coverage often mirrored the same fragmentation seen online, just in more structured language. This brings us to the question raised by many on the internet. Did Tommaso Cioni and Annie Guthrie attempt to conceal evidence? In a word, no. The gaps in the timeline exist because Nancy Guthrie was supposed to be alone at the time, not because her family is hiding something. On February 16, 2026, the Pima County Sheriff's Office publicly cleared the entire Guthrie family, including Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni, of any involvement in the disappearance. The announcement was unusually direct in tone, reflecting both the intensity of public speculation and the need to stabilize misinformation circulating online. Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the findings clearly, stating, "To be clear, the Guthrie family has been cleared as possible suspects in this case. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious, and are victims in this case." Sheriff Nanos also directly confronted the online narrative that had formed in the days prior, where speculation about internal involvement had circulated widely across social platforms and discussion forums. His response was pointed: "To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel." Subsequent reporting reinforced this position, confirming that Annie Guthrie, Tommaso Cioni, and all immediate family members were fully cleared of suspicion. Coverage emphasized that their involvement in the investigation was cooperative rather than adversarial, and that they had participated in interviews, provided access to information, and assisted investigators during early evidence collection phases. The New York Post summarized the official stance by noting that the family was no longer under scrutiny and should be considered outside the investigative suspect framework entirely. Despite this formal exoneration, the investigation itself did not narrow. The case has settled into what we can call sustained uncertainty. Authorities confirmed that the investigation remains active, but no suspect has been publicly named, no arrest has been made, and no single theory has been elevated above the others. Instead, the work has shifted into deeper, quieter phases. Forensic teams continue to process DNA from recovered items. Analysts are revisiting surveillance footage frame by frame, and digital specialists are reconstructing movement patterns from fragmented electronic signals. Each track of evidence has been developed separately, then cross-referenced in an attempt to find alignment. However, so far, the center of the gap remains one figure, the unidentified masked man captured on camera. Despite image enhancement, public distribution, and investigative review, no confirmed identity has been attached to him. Reports from outlets like the New York Post indicate that the individual remains unknown, with no arrests tied to his presence near the home. At the same time, the broader condition of the case remains unchanged in its most critical aspect. There has been no confirmed proof of life, no verified location, no recovery. Reporting from The Guardian emphasized that investigators continue to treat the situation as a suspected abduction, supported by physical evidence and coordinated multi-agency analysis. That classification shapes how resources are allocated, how timelines are interpreted, and how long the case remains actively pursued at scale. And then there is the silence. In many abduction cases, communication, whether through ransom demands, indirect signals, or attempted negotiation, creates a channel, however fragile, between those responsible and those searching. Here, that channel never stabilized. The early ransom-style messages were inconsistent, publicly routed, and never clearly authenticated. After that, nothing coherent followed. No sustained contact, no verifiable demands, no structured negotiation. In investigative terms, silence can point in multiple directions. It may suggest a failed plan. It may indicate that the objective was never financial, or it may reflect a level of control where communication has been deliberately avoided to reduce traceability. Cases like J.C. Dugard, who was found alive after 18 years, or Elizabeth Smart, recovered 9 months after her abduction, demonstrate that resolution can come long after the initial window closes. At the same time, there are cases like Maura Murray or Madeleine McCann, where years of investigation, international attention, and extensive resources have not produced definitive answers. These comparisons are supposed to be reminders of range. Some cases break open unexpectedly. Others remain suspended for decades. Public speculation, particularly online, moved quickly toward individuals closest to Nancy, including family members. That kind of reaction is not uncommon in high-profile cases, where incomplete information creates space for assumption. But law enforcement made a clear and documented statement. The family was not involved, had been cooperative, and should not be treated as suspects. What remains now is a case defined by contrast. There is significant activity, but no resolution. There is evidence, but no confirmed sequence. There is a suspect on camera, but no name attached. The investigation continues to move. But Nancy Guthrie is still missing, and until one definitive connection is made, the case will remain open, active, and waiting for the moment where uncertainty finally gives way to fact. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.